The iron shattered into fragments, and the crowd's heart stopped in the face of such boldness. Where once there was punishment and submission, a spark of freedom emerged. But what came afterward made the village lower its eyes. Follow this destiny. Subscribe to the channel and don't miss out. The bells of St. Benedict's Chapel echoed throughout Villa das Flores, while the dawn mist still hung over the dirt roads. Residents rushed from their adobe homes, some still adjusting hats and shawls, others pulling sleepy children by the arm. In the central square, a cart had been positioned as an altar of shame. Chained to the wooden axle, with wrists already, wounded and eyes swollen from crying, was Teresa, daughter of Colonel Augusto, the most powerful man in that forgotten corner of the Bahian backlands. Teresa had always been known for her determined voice and proud gaze, so unusual for a young woman from that region, where women were raised to serve, obey, and remain silent. She had refused to accept the marriage arranged by her father to Dr. Mendonça, a neighboring landowner, a wealthy man of advanced age known for his cruelty toward the workers on his plantation. This refusal, interpreted as a challenge to paternal authority, was now being punished with public humiliation. "Here we respect the order of things," shouted the colonel as he circled around the cart. "No daughter of mine dishonors the family name." The crowd grew, amid whispers and glances divided between veiled compassion and approval of the punishment. Older women nodded in agreement with the punishment, while younger ones kept their eyes lowered, feeling the weight of the message. This could be the fate of any who dared to disobey. Teresa remained motionless. There were no more tears in her eyes, only a silent dignity that even chains couldn't break. She knew she had lost everything: her surname, the community's respect, her father's love. Only one certainty remained burning in her chest: she would not bend. At the back of the crowd, a man observed the scene with attentive eyes. Damião hadn't planned to be there that morning. He had come only to trade medicinal herbs and fruits for salt and tools. As one of the few who moved between the Quilombo of Santo Amaro and the village, his presence was tolerated on market days, provided he kept his distance and concluded his business quickly. The son of escaped slaves and indigenous people of the region, Damião carried in his body the marks of two heritages that the white world insisted on erasing. He wore simple but clean clothes and carried on his back a ceremonial machete inherited from his indigenous grandfather, more a symbol of resistance than a weapon. The sight of the chained young woman stirred something within him, an ancestral memory of shackles and whips that still echoed in the blood of his people. His first instinct was to continue on his way, to avoid trouble. Survival was the primary rule in the world he lived in. But his feet seemed stuck to the ground, as if the roots of the ancient trees in the square were holding him there. That was when he noticed the presence of Manuel, a boy of no more than 6 years old, grandson of the old midwife, Dona Josefa. The child, with light skin and eyes as dark as jabuticaba berries, watched the scene with an expression of pure helplessness. His little eyes went from Teresa to Damião in a silent plea that only innocence is capable of formulating. Little. Manuel was motherless, having lost her during childbirth and lived under his grandmother's care. He was known in the village for his fragility and for the way he had become attached to Teresa, who used to tell him stories and bring him sweets when she escaped her father's vigilance. Manuel held against his chest a small cloth bundle which Damião recognized as a protection amulet made by Dona Josefa. That was the trigger. Damião took a deep breath, adjusted the straw hat on his head, and began walking toward the cart. The crowd, noticing his approach, involuntarily made way. It wasn't fear, but the surprise of seeing that Quilombo man breaking the unwritten rules that governed relationships in that place. Colonel Augusto, upon noticing Damião's advance, placed his hand on the revolver he carried at his waist. "Get back to your place, Negro," he shouted. "This is none of your business." Damião didn't respond. He continued walking with the solemnity of one crossing sacred ground. His eyes, fixed on Teresa's, conveyed a message that words could not express. Upon reaching the cart, he removed the machete from his back. A murmur of apprehension ran through the crowd. Some women covered their eyes, others pulled their children close. The colonel's men drew their weapons, but hesitated at Augusto's signal. who seemed curious to see how far this audacity would go. With a single precise blow, Damião cut the chains that bound Teresa. The sound of the yielding metal echoed through the square like thunder on a clear day. He extended his hand to the young woman, who after a moment of hesitation accepted. As he lifted her from the cart, their eyes met. There was fear in hers, but also a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Who gave you the—" "Right," shouted the colonel, advancing with his revolver in hand. "In this land I make the laws." Damião turned to face him, still holding Teresa's hand. His voice, when he finally spoke, had the calmness of a deep river. "No man has the right to chain another human being. That law is older than you, Colonel." Little Manuel ran to them and wrapped himself around Teresa's legs. She automatically placed her free hand on the boy's head in a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the crowd. Some men were already moving toward Damião, responding to the colonel's silent order. That was when the voice of Dona Josefa, the most respected midwife in the region, rose above the murmurs. "Let them go, Augusto." The white-haired elder with a face marked by time stepped into the center of the square. "You've already lost your daughter. Don't lose your soul as well." The colonel hesitated, torn between anger and the superstitious respect he felt for the woman who had brought into the world not only him, but almost the entire population of that place. Taking advantage of the moment of indecision, Damião led Teresa and little Manuel toward the village exit. They walked in silence, feeling the crowd's gaze fixed on their backs, expecting at any moment to hear the crack of a gunshot. But all they heard was Dona Josefa's voice, still confronting the colonel with words they couldn't distinguish. Upon reaching the edge of the forest that surrounded the village, Damião stopped and looked at Teresa. "Are you sure? There's no going back once we enter the forest." Teresa took one last look at the village where she was born and raised, at the church tower where she had been baptized, at the big house where her father reigned supreme. Then she gazed at Manuel's face, who was still clinging to her as if his life depended on it. "I'm more certain of this than anything else in my life," she replied, squeezing Damião's hand more tightly. And so the three disappeared among the trees while the sun finally broke the horizon, bathing Vila das Flores in golden light, where nothing would ever be the same after that morning. The trek through the dense forest lasted hours. Damião guided the way with the precision of one who knows every trail, every stone, every stream in that territory. Teresa followed right behind, carrying Manuel in her arms, when fatigue overcame the boy's little legs. Her wrists burned where the chains had left marks, but the physical pain was insignificant compared to the whirlwind of emotions consuming her. Fear, relief, doubt, and a strange sense of freedom mingled in her chest. "We're almost there," announced Damião, breaking the long silence. "The Quilombo is beyond that elevation." He pointed to a small hill covered with vegetation. "Will the people accept me?" asked Teresa hesitantly. The question carried the weight of someone who had always belonged to the opposite side of a historical division. She was the colonel's daughter, part of the family that for generations had been a symbol of oppression against blacks and indigenous people in the region. Damião stopped and turned to face her. "In the Quilombo, we don't judge anyone by the blood that runs in their veins, but by the actions that spring from their heart." His words, simple and direct, momentarily calmed Teresa's concerns. As they crossed the hill, the Quilombo of Santo Amaro revealed itself before them. Different from what Teresa had imagined, it wasn't a disorganized cluster of hidden huts, but an organized community with mud houses, arranged in a semicircle around a central yard, where a large fire burned even during the day. Carefully cultivated gardens extended around the dwellings, and children played under the supervision of women who were weaving or preparing food. As they approached, the residents noticed their presence. A middle-aged woman, with a colorful turban wrapped around her head, stepped forward to receive them. "Damião, we were worried. You took longer than usual." Her curious eyes fell on Teresa and the boy. "And who are your friends?" "This is Teresa, and the little one is Manuel, Dona Josefa's grandson," replied Damião. "They need our protection, Aunt Jurema." Jurema, whom Teresa would soon discover was the matriarch of the Quilombo and Damião's foster mother, studied her for a moment before opening a warm smile. Then, "Be welcome to our home." Her gesture of acceptance was like a floodgate opening. Other women approached, offering fresh water from a gourd, a stool to rest, a bowl of manioc porridge with fish for Manuel, who accepted with eyes wide with hunger. The first night in the Quilombo was one of adaptation. Teresa and Manuel were accommodated in Jurema's house, a simple but welcoming space, with woven straw mats covering the packed earth floor and dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beams, filling the air with an aroma that reminded Teresa of the remedies Dona Josefa prepared in the village. Lying on the mat with Manuel asleep at her side, Teresa couldn't close her eyes. She mentally reviewed the day's events, trying to understand how her life had changed so drastically in a matter of hours. That was when she heard a commotion outside. Exalted voices were discussing in an urgent tone. Leaving Manuel sleeping, Teresa approached the woven straw door and peeked outside. In the center of the yard, illuminated by the fire that never went out, a group of men surrounded Damião. Among them was Zé Pedro, one of the oldest in the Quilombo, whose dark skin glistened with sweat despite the cool night. "You've brought danger to all of us," accused the elder, pointing a trembling finger at Damião. "The colonel won't rest until he finds his daughter. He'll bring henchmen, police, he'll burn the entire Quilombo." "And what do you suggest I should have done, Zé Pedro?" retorted Damião, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Leave the young woman chained like an animal? Pretend not to see?" "It's not our fight," insisted the old man. "Each has their own burdens to carry in this world." Others murmured in agreement. The fear was palpable in their voices, an old fear justified by the violence that always fell upon Quilombos when they defied the established order. It was Jurema who ended the discussion, placing herself between Damião and the other men. "When my mother fled the plantation carrying Damião still in her womb, it was the APACHE people who sheltered her and hid her," she said, her voice carrying the weight of collective memory. "And when the soldiers massacred the village, it was you men of the Quilombo who gave us shelter. Our history is made of hands extended in moments of need. We will not be the ones to break that chain." Her words seemed to momentarily calm the spirits, but Teresa could sense that the tension persisted. She quietly closed the door and returned to her mat, a new weight settling in her heart. She was putting people she barely knew at risk. Guilt began to corrode her from within. Perhaps she should leave in the morning, seek another place far from there, where her father's fury couldn't reach those who had helped her. The following days brought a surprisingly comforting routine. Teresa, determined not to be a burden, offered to help with all tasks. She learned to harvest manioc without damaging the plant, to prepare porridge to the right consistency, to weave straw for baskets and mats. Her hands, once delicate and protected, soon gained calluses and scratches, but there was a strange pride in this. Each mark was a symbol of her new identity, of a life built on her own choices. Manuel adapted with the ease of children. Soon, he was running with the other boys from the Quilombo, learning new games, words in Yoruba that the elders listened to with nostalgic smiles, stories that would never be told in the village. His persistent cough, which worried Dona Josefa so much, seemed to improve with the pure forest air and the teas that Jurema prepared with fresh herbs. Damião maintained a respectful distance from Teresa during the day, but their eyes met frequently. That night, when everyone gathered around the fire to share stories and songs, he would sit close enough that they could talk in low voices. It was during these nightly conversations that Teresa began to truly know the man who had risked everything to save her. Damião told her about his childhood divided between the Quilombo and the APACHE villages, about how he had learned to move between two worlds that the white world insisted on destroying. He spoke of his mother, who died when he was only 12, and of how Jurema had raised him since then. He confessed his fears, his hopes, his dream of one day seeing the forest peoples free from the yoke of colonels and plantation owners. Teresa, in turn, shared memories of her mother, who passed away when she was still a child, of afternoons spent in the company of Dona Josefa, learning about herbs and childbirth, of the exact moment she decided she would not marry the man chosen by her father, even knowing the consequences. "How did you know I needed help?" she asked. One night, as they watched the embers of the nearly extinguished fire. "I didn't know," Damian replied simply. "I just did what my heart commanded." 2 weeks after their arrival at the Quilombo, the fragile peace was interrupted. One of the sentinels who always watched the surroundings returned running, breathless. "Armed men," he alerted. "Many. They're scouring the forest less than an hour from here." The panic was immediate. Children were gathered into the houses, men grabbed improvised weapons, women extinguished fires and hid food. Damian found Teresa, helping to organize the evacuation of children to a hiding place in the forest. "They're getting closer," he said, his face grave. "My father won't give up," replied Teresa, guilt evident in her voice. "He'd rather see the entire Quilombo burned than admit I escaped. I can't let you suffer because of me." Her decision was made. Before Damian could object, Jurema approached them, bringing a small cloth bundle. 3 days, she said, handing the package to Teresa. "That's how long we have before they find this place. You need to take the boy to Jacaranda village. Look for Chief Tupa. He owes a favor to our people." Teresa looked at Damian, confused. But I can't leave you," Teresa completed, her heart tight with the idea of leaving. "You welcomed me, protected me. I can't simply flee and abandon you." Jurema held Teresa's face between her calloused hands, looking at her with the wisdom of one who had weathered many storms. "It's not abandonment, child. It's protection. Little Manuel can't be here when they arrive, and you're the only one he trusts to take him." The boy, clinging to Teresa's skirts as if sensing the imminent separation, looked from one to the other with frightened eyes. "But Damian knows the way better," argued Teresa, seeking any alternative. It was Damian who answered, his voice firm despite the evident pain. "I need to stay. I have to help defend the Quilombo." His eyes met Teresa's, conveying much more than words could express. 3 days, repeated Jurema, placing the bundle in Teresa's hands. "Take food, water, and this amulet. Always follow the river's course, keeping it on your right. When you find a turtle-shaped rock, turn into the forest and walk until sunset. The village will be there." Teresa nodded, swallowing the tears that threatened to overflow. There was no time for crying. Quickly, helped by some women from the Quilombo, she gathered what was necessary for the journey: a gourd with fresh water, manioc flour mixed with dried fish, a patchwork blanket for the cold nights, a small knife for protection. Damian approached when she was almost ready to leave. "Take this," he said, extending his ceremonial machete. "It was my grandfather's. It brought me protection for all these years. Now it will protect you." Teresa hesitated before accepting the weapon. "How will I return it?" The question carried a much greater weight than the simple words suggested. "When all this is over," he replied, trying to instill more confidence in his voice than he actually felt. "We'll meet at the great game-lera tree by the river, the one where we saw the flock of blue macaws." Teresa nodded, keeping the promise in her heart like a talisman. With quick, precise movements, she tied the machete to her back, as she had seen Damian do so many times. Then she took Manuel in her arms, holding him against her chest. "We have to go, little one. We're going on an adventure, just the two of us." The boy didn't respond, just tightened his little arms around her neck more firmly. Jurema approached for a final blessing, tracing invisible symbols on both their foreheads with her fingers. "May the ancestors guide your steps, and may Oxum calm the waters in your path," she murmured. The farewell to Damian was brief and restrained, limited to a long look and a gentle touch of hands. There was no room for greater demonstrations of affection, not with time running out and lives at risk. But in that simple touch of fingers was contained an entire universe of unspoken promises. And so when the sun was still high in the sky, Teresa and Manuel left the Quilombo, following the path indicated by Jurema. As they moved away, the sound of drums began to echo behind them, not the joyful drums of feast nights, but a solemn and grave rhythm that Teresa had never heard before. It was the alert call, warning all allies in the forest that danger was approaching. The journey through the forest proved much more difficult than Teresa had imagined. Although the river served as a guide, the terrain was rugged, cut by exposed roots and fallen trunks. Manuel, despite being small and apparently fragile, proved to be a surprisingly resilient companion, walking on his own whenever possible and complaining little even when fatigue was evident on his sweaty little face. When night fell, they camped in a small clearing near the river. Teresa didn't dare light a fire, fearing unwanted attention. They shared the cold food and wrapped themselves together in the patchwork blanket, protecting themselves from the evening dew that was beginning to fall. "Will we go back to the Quilombo afterward?" asked Manuel, his small voice almost lost in the night chorus of insects and frogs. "To see Damião and Aunt Jurema?" The innocent question made Teresa's heart tighten. How to explain to a child that the world they knew was crumbling around them? How to promise a return that she herself didn't know would be possible? "When it's safe," she finally replied, stroking the boy's hair. "Now sleep. Tomorrow we have a long way ahead." But sleep was slow to come for Teresa. Lying under the stars that shone between the treetops, she couldn't shake the worry for those who had stayed behind. She tried to console herself, thinking that the Quilombo had existed for generations, surviving numerous threats. Its inhabitants knew how to defend themselves, knew how to hide when necessary. But this time was different. This time the threat came because of her. The second day of walking brought new challenges. The sky, once clear, became covered with heavy clouds, and soon the rain began to fall, first in sparse drops, then in dense curtains that made it almost impossible to see the path. The river, their faithful guide, began to rise rapidly, threatening to overflow. Teresa and Manuel sought shelter under a large tree whose roots formed a kind of natural cave. There, soaked and shivering with cold, they spent hours that seemed endless, while the storm raged around them. "I'm afraid," confessed Manuel, nestled against Teresa's chest. "Everything will be fine," she promised, even without knowing if she could fulfill such a promise. "Remember what Jurema always says, after the storm the sky is bluer." When the rain finally diminished, they resumed their journey. But the terrain had transformed into a muddy trap. Each step was an effort, and soon Manuel could no longer walk on his own. Teresa carried him on her back, ignoring the protest of her own exhausted muscles. It was near dusk that they spotted the turtle-shaped rock mentioned by Jurema. It was a curious formation, sculpted by nature over centuries, with protrusions that really resembled the shell and head of the animal. As instructed, they deviated from the river's course, entering deeper into the forest. The path now was less defined, almost non-existent in some stretches. The surrounding forest seemed to thicken, as if trying to hinder the advance of strangers. The sun was already setting when Teresa realized they were no longer alone. Figures moved silently among the trees, following their steps. She felt her heart race. Were they her father's men, or perhaps the indigenous people of the village they were seeking? Instinctively, she tightened her grip on the handle of Damião's machete with one hand, while with the other, she held Manuel more firmly against herself. "Who's there?" she called, trying to keep her voice steady. "Show yourself." There was a moment of absolute silence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then a man emerged from behind a tree. He was tall, of proud bearing, with reddish skin marked by traditional paintings and black hair tied in a topknot. He wore only a loincloth of woven fibers and carried a bow almost as tall as himself. "You are in APACHE lands," he said in Portuguese, heavy with accent. "What do you seek here, white woman?" Teresa took a deep breath, remembering Jurema's words. "I seek Chief Tupã. I come in the name of Jurema, from the Quilombo of Santo Amaro." Upon hearing Jurema's name, the warrior's expression softened slightly. He made a gesture, and soon other warriors revealed themselves, at least 10, all armed, with bows or spears, all observing her with expressions ranging from distrust to curiosity. "Follow us," ordered the first warrior. "But know that we are vigilant. One false step and you will not see the next dawn." Teresa nodded, understanding the seriousness of the warning. They followed in silence through the forest that was rapidly darkening until they reached a clearing where several huts arranged in a circle formed the Jacaranda village. In the center, a large fire burned, illuminating the faces of the inhabitants who interrupted their activities to observe the arrival of the strangers. A collective murmur ran through the village when Teresa entered the circle of light, carrying the sleeping Manuel in her arms. An older man whose wrinkled face carried the wisdom of many seasons stepped forward. He wore a headdress of red and yellow feathers, and his bare chest displayed old scars that seemed to tell stories of many battles. "I am Tupin," he said, studying her with penetrating eyes. "Why does Jurema send a white woman to our village?" Teresa felt the weight of that gaze, as if the old chief could see through her skin to the core of her soul. With a clear voice, she narrated the events that brought her there, the refusal of the forced marriage, the public punishment, the rescue by Damião, the days in the Quilombo, the imminent threat. "Jurema said you owe a favor to her people," she concluded. "She asked that you shelter us until it's safe to return." Tupin remained silent for a few moments, as if pondering every word spoken by Teresa. Finally, he gestured toward one of the huts. "You may stay, for now." The answer, though not warm, was enough. Teresa felt her legs weaken with relief. Only then did she realize how exhausted, hungry, and sore she was. A middle-aged woman approached, gently taking Manuel from her arms. "Come," she said in a soft voice, "you need rest and food." Teresa followed her, grateful for the hospitality, even if reluctant. But before she could enter the designated hut, Tupin called her again. "Tomorrow at dawn I want to know everything about the men who pursue you, how many they are, what weapons they carry, what paths they know." His tone left no doubt. This was not a request but an order, and Teresa understood that, although they were temporarily safe, new challenges awaited them. In the hut, lying on a soft mat with Manuel asleep beside her, Teresa finally allowed the tears to come. She cried silently, letting the tension accumulated over the past days dissolve with each sob. She cried for Damião, for Jurema, for everyone in the Quilombo who were now in danger because of her. She cried for the father she had lost. Not that day in the square, but long before, when power and pride had hardened his heart, and she cried for herself, for the girl she once was, and for the woman she was being forced to become amid adversity. When sleep finally claimed her, her last thoughts were of Damião and the promise of reunion at the great Gamalira tree by the river, a promise that, even in dreams, seemed increasingly distant. The dawn of the third day in Jacaranda village brought a sky laden with heavy clouds, as if nature itself sensed what was to come. Teresa woke with a start, her heart pounding. Beside her, Manuel still slept deeply, oblivious to the concerns afflicting the adults. Outside, raised voices caught her attention. She carefully covered the boy and left the hut, coming upon a group gathered around a young warrior who had just arrived. He was covered in mud and dried blood, with scratches all over his body and an expression of one who had seen hell. "The Quilombo was attacked," announced Jurua, still breathless. "White men with firearms. They burned several houses, took prisoners. Among them is Jurema." Teresa's heart froze. "And Damião?" she asked, her voice failing. Jurua initially avoided her gaze. "He fought like a true warrior. I saw when he took a shot to the shoulder, but he was still facing 3 men at once when I had to leave." The gravest news came next. The colonel had issued an ultimatum: 3 days for Teresa to surrender voluntarily, or all the prisoners would be eliminated and the Quilombo would be completely destroyed. "I need to go back," she declared without hesitation, fear replaced by an iron determination. "I can't let them die because of me." "It would be suicide," contested Tupin, leaning on his ornate staff. "Your father's men are everywhere, armed and thirsty for revenge, and there's the boy to consider." The mention of Manuel made Teresa falter. How could she abandon him now, after all they had been through together? But how could she abandon Damião and the others who risked everything to protect her? The impasse was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected figure emerging from the forest trail. With slow but firm steps, Dona Josefa, the village midwife and Manuel's grandmother, entered the village. Her clothes were torn, her face marked by scratches, but her eyes shone with a determination that defied her advanced age. "Josefa!" exclaimed Teresa, running to embrace her. "How did you find us?" "I followed the signs that Jurema taught me many years ago," replied the elder, returning the embrace. "Where is my grandson?" When she learned that Manuel was safe, Dona Josefa addressed the gathered council. "I bring news and a proposal," she announced, with the authority that years conferred upon her. The prisoners were alive, though mistreated. Damian, wounded, remained under constant vigilance, but his determination had not been broken. "Your father is furious, Teresa," continued the midwife, "but your escape caused more impact than you imagine. The women of the village especially, the younger ones, have begun to question. Your courage lit a spark that was dormant in them. From there the plan was born. Teresa would return not as a prisoner or repentant daughter, but as a negotiator, accompanied by Pataxo warriors disguised as merchants. Dona Josefa would gather supporters in the village." "More than you imagine," she assured when Teresa questioned who would be willing to confront the colonel. "Your father rules by fear, not respect. Many are just waiting for an opportunity to defy him." Throughout the night, the plan was refined. Every movement, every possibility was considered. Tupin offered bows and special arrows, painted with protection symbols. Warriors volunteered for the mission, even knowing the risks. "And Manuel?" asked Teresa, concern evident in her trembling voice. "He will stay here, under my personal protection," guaranteed the chief. "It is a sacred promise." The E. Following morning, the farewell was painful. Manuel clung to Teresa, crying. "Will you come back?" he asked with a choked voice. "I promise," she replied, kissing his forehead, "and we will build a new home where you will grow up free and happy." The journey back to Villa das Flores was silent and tense. Every sound in the forest, every movement in the shadows could mean danger. In the evening of the second day, they spotted the first houses in the distance. "Are you ready?" asked Dona Josefa, noticing Teresa's hesitation. "I am," she replied, holding the handle of Damian's ceremonial machete as if seeking his strength. For him, for all of us. At midday on the third day, the hour set for the confrontation, the Uonda central square was more crowded than ever before. On one side, the colonel and his armed men, with the prisoners at the front, among them Damian and Jurema, visibly wounded but with defiant looks. On the other, a surprising crowd of residents, some with improvised tools as weapons, others with only their silent presence as a form of protest. And in the center, like a ray of sunlight cutting through storm clouds, Teresa walked alone until she stood a few meters from her father. "So you've returned," said the colonel, his voice oscillating between anger and relief. "Finally regained your senses." "I didn't come back to submit, father," replied Teresa, her clear voice echoing across the square. "I came to negotiate the release of these innocent people and the end of this senseless persecution." The colonel frowned, unaccustomed to being publicly challenged, even more so by his own daughter. "Negotiate? You're in no position to demand anything. You dishonored your name, fled like a criminal, allied yourself with slaves and savages." "I only chose to be free," Teresa calmly retorted. "Free to decide my own destiny, free to love whom I wish. And I discovered I'm not alone in this fight." As if responding to an invisible signal, the Pataxo warriors emerged from the sides of the square, bows in hand. At the same time, more residents appeared from adjacent streets, forming a human barrier that made it clear that any violence would meet resistance. The colonel paled, feeling control slip from his hands for the first time in decades. "This is treason," he shouted, drawing his revolver with a trembling hand. It was then that Dona Josefa stepped forward, placing herself beside Teresa. "It's not treason to defend what is just, Augusto," she said, her voice carrying the weight of wisdom. "This village doesn't belong just to you, it belongs to all of us, and it's time we lived under new laws, laws of respect and freedom. An old foreman of the colonel, respected for his years of loyalty, was the first to lower his weapon. "Enough, Colonel," he said with a tired voice. "The girl is right, we need to change." Like a dam breaking, others followed his example. One by one, the colonel's men lowered their weapons, until only he remained in an attacking position, revolver pointed erratically at faces that once feared him and now defied him. Without order, without tradition, everything crumbles. He muttered more to himself than to others. "It doesn't have to crumble, Father," said Teresa softly, extending her hand. "We can build something better, where respect doesn't come from fear, but from mutual understanding." Time seemed to freeze. Teresa could hear her own heart beating against her chest. She saw her father's finger tremble on the trigger, saw the conflict in his aged eyes. Then, as if an invisible great weight had struck him, the colonel's shoulders fell in defeat. The revolver slipped from his fingers, falling to the ground with a dull thud that sealed the end of an era. "You're as stubborn as your mother," murmured, a solitary tear tracing a path on his time-marked face. The prisoners were immediately freed. Damiens, despite his injured arm in an improvised sling, ran to Teresa, enveloping her in an embrace that said more than words. "You came back," he whispered against her hair. "I promised, didn't I?" she replied, tears finally flowing freely. At the game Lera tree by the river, Jurema, supported by young people from the Quilombo, approached the couple. "You did what many strong men lacked the courage to do," she said, taking Teresa's hands in hers. "You faced injustice with the most powerful of weapons, the truth." The following weeks brought profound changes to Villa das Flores. A council was formed with representatives from the village, the Quilombo and the Pataxo village. The colonel, though not dispossessed of his properties, saw his absolute power dissolve. Damiens and Teresa retrieved Manuel from the village and, together, established themselves in a house by the river, under the great Gamilera tree that had witnessed their promise. There they created a home that soon became a refuge and meeting point for people of all origins. As the seasons passed, old divisions began to dissolve. Children played together, learning words in Portuguese, Yoruba, and Pataxohan. Women exchanged knowledge of herbs and cures. Men shared hunting and planting techniques. At the baptism of Teresa and Damiens's daughter, little Esperanza, even Colonel Augusto attended, visibly aged, but with something new in his gaze, perhaps the late understanding. That change doesn't necessarily mean destruction. "What are you thinking about?" asked Damiens one afternoon, finding Teresa contemplative by the river, watching Manuel teach his little sister her first steps. "About broken chains," she replied, a serene smile on her lips, "and about how freedom, once experienced, can no longer be contained." He nodded, understanding perfectly. Together they watched the sun slowly descend behind the treetops, tinting the sky crimson and gold. The phrase that Damiens had engraved on his ceremonial machete, "Here a human being is not an object," had become not just a motto, but a reality, lived with each new dawn in that piece of land where courage and love had transformed not only individual destinies but an entire community. If this journey of courage and transformation touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Just as Teresa broke chains that seemed unbreakable and built bridges between divided worlds, your interaction helps us continue to bring stories that inspire and show that, even in the darkest moments, the flame of freedom